as I mentioned, Jeff, and we were talking a little bit prior offline. When I was growing up, my uncle was actually kind of the big brother I never had, and spent a lot of time with him. And he had one photograph that was framed. It was a poster print, framed up on his wall in his apartment there, and it was, of course, of the Tank Man photograph. And it just it influenced me from a very young age, and that's an image that's burned into my mind. And when I was in college in 1999 up to 2022, I actually went over to China and visited, and got to stand at Tiananmen Square looking at the Forbidden City there, and standing, well, not necessarily on the road, but in the place where those photos were taken. And it meant the world to me to be able to be there, to stand where those protesters stood in 1989. And I believe you had mentioned that this is a 35th anniversary coming up on June 5th, is it?
Yeah, June 5th.
Awesome. So for any of the audience that might not know who you are, I'm sure they're familiar with your photo, but maybe you can kind of give us a bit of an introduction to who Jeff Widener is, and maybe how you got into photography and into photojournalism.
Oh boy. Well, my fascination with photography probably happened when I was about 8 years old. My father was working for an aerospace company in Scottsdale, Arizona, and he used to use a photographer that worked with Life magazine, Lee Weiner. This guy was getting $5,000 day rates in 1962. I mean, I was blown away by it. That's a lot of money. But he invited my dad. My dad invited him to come over one Christmas to take some family pictures. So I remember him arriving through the door, and he had a big trunk. And I saw him put it on the carpet. He opened it up and started taking out lenses and light meters and yellow packs of Kodak film. All this stuff, just all the colors and everything and the technical stuff. And it just stuck in my brain. And I was fascinated by it. So as the years went by, a couple of years, my parents gifted me a Kodak Fun Flash camera. And I still have the first photo I ever took. I wish I had it. I should have thought ahead. It's got the little ridges around it. It says 1967. It was my grandfather walking across the lawn. And it wasn't the first roll. It was the first frame, and it was sharp, and it looked good. I still have it. Miracle, I don't know how, through all the years and travel of all the countries, that thing still is, it's still around. But from that point on, I used to like to draw in class, and I think a lot of young kids, they start developing their artistic, styles and everything. But one day I saw a picture from Leonardo da Vinci, and I saw that picture and the lighting, and I realized at that point I'll never be anything close to that. And I was very depressed, and then I thought, I got an idea that it would be a lot quicker and easier if I just took a picture instead of painting. And I used to bug this guy at a drugstore in Northridge, California, and I used to go to this guy, and he was about 25 or 30. He's kind of quiet, and I always used to want to look at the cameras, and he pulled them out for me. He knew I couldn't afford anything, but he did it. But I kept trying. I mowed lawns to get money to buy, bits and pieces. And finally, I got into high school, and Cleveland High School in Northridge. And my photography instructor, his name was Harry Eibach. He looked like Wally Cox. Some of you old timers may remember him. And I was in the hallway where all the lockers were, and he said, "Well, it's not such a bad camera." It was a Topcon out of 100, Bessler. And I said, "Yeah, but they said your class was full." And he says, when do you want to take it?" And so I told him, and I got in his photo class, and that's where I learned how to develop film. And I know I'm rambling here, but if you want to get to where I'm going. So I got a job working illegally at Jack in the Box, which is a local hamburger place, 10 at night till 8 in the morning. And I remember I had a Nikon catalog, and it was near the fryers with the burgers. And I used to look every single page. And back then it was the Nikon F2, which is the big camera. And I remember that I could afford one Nikon lens every 2 weeks. And so I was getting paid like $150 every 2 weeks. And back then that was enough for one lens. So when I got in that class, I had a lot of money the kids didn't have because I was working illegally. And of course, I can't hold the guy, the manager, responsible because, you know, I mean, I looked older for my age, maybe. But I remember tossing those burgers, you know, at midnight, and college fraternities would show up ordering 100 tacos, and grease was splattering all over my Nikon catalogs. And I remember it like in my head, really simple. And the thing about my teacher was he was an fine art instructor. And it was cool. And I learned how to do tone separations and lithos and all that stuff. But there was one high school in Reseda, which is a more affluent area in the valley. And they had some really good photographers there that went on to be fantastic photographers today. And I really, really, really was watching them carefully. Now, in the senior year, you know, you've made friends, you're not going to go anywhere. You really don't want to go anywhere. But I didn't have that many friends because every day I was bringing a camera to school. You can't do that today. But back then I had early pictures of what it was like to be in high school. And so I decided to go check out the annual photo salon at Reseda High School. And I went there and I was absolutely blown away. I mean, it was the most exciting thing that ever happened to me in my entire life. And I met Warren King, and he was a combat photographer from World War II. The kind of thing we were talking about earlier. And he was a really smart businessman. He got his department listed under industrial arts. So there was more money. And he managed to put a color darkroom together. And because of that color darkroom, other students had to be allowed into that school because there was limited funds for that kind of a thing. Well, I showed my work, and he said, well, welcome, Jeff. And I got in because you had to be a gifted child to be transferred to a school system. And I never considered myself gifted. In fact, when I was in elementary school, I was Charlie Brown. I was the kid always dropping the ball. I never did anything right. That was the furthest from my mind. So I got the transfer, which is really strange. All new kids. And it was funny because they asked, what kind of cameras do you have? You know, wants to get an inventory on the students, what they have. I have a Petri and a 50mm lens. I have a Minolta SRT 101, and I got a wide angle lens and this and that. Jeff, what do you have? I said, well, I've got a Nikon FT and a Nikon F2. I've got a 24mm. I've got an 18mm. I've got a 135. I've got a 300mm. And I just went on, and I made enemies from that minute on. I mean, and then at the end of the year, there was a Scholastic scholarship. It was a national scholarship, and I entered that, and I won it. And so I made even less friends after that. I beat 8,000 students across the country. They flew me to Kenya and Tanzania and Europe. So that was the beginning of my travel days. And so from that point on, I went to college and sort of went on from there. And if you got any questions or you want me to go some other direction, I can do that.